At 65, I never thought my own daughter would humiliate me in front of her husband's family. At her father-in-law's retirement party, she looked at me and said, "Dad, apologize now. If you can't behave here, don't come back." Everyone watched as I was treated like a stranger. I said nothing. I walked away and made one decision that changed everything. Days later, I sold the house they thought was theirs and disappeared overseas. Then my daughter called, furious and desperate, "Dad, give our house back." She had no idea what I had already uncovered. You found Dad Family Revenge, and I'm grateful you're here. Tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from right now? Let's see how far this story travels. Note some details in this story are fictional, added for storytelling purposes. Names and settings are not based on specific individuals, but everything this story teaches you is worth keeping. The mirror in my bedroom had never lied to me, that morning standing in front of it with my navy suit jacket in hand. It told me the same truth it always had, that I was a 65-year-old man with calloused hands, a crease across my forehead, that no amount of sleep could smooth out, and a suit that had seen better decades. I slipped the jacket on anyway. Margaret had picked it out for me back in 1998 at a little menswear shop on Queens Boulevard that had since closed down. She had held it up against my shoulders, tilted her head the way she always did when she was deciding something important, and said, "This one. You look like a man who means something in this one." I had laughed at the time. Now, 17 years after losing her, I still reached for it whenever I needed to feel like that man again. I smoothed the lapels, straightened my collar, and let out a slow breath. Today was George Mercer's retirement party, my son-in-law's father, a man I had met exactly 4 times in 5 years of marriage between our children. The event was being held at the Riverside Club in Greenwich, Connecticut, a private club established in 1923, the kind of place where membership was inherited rather than applied for. My daughter Claire had texted me the address 3 days ago with a single line beneath it. "Please be on time, Dad. It matters to Daniel's family." I had read that message twice. Then I had set my phone down and gone back to the crossword puzzle on my kitchen table. From the closet shelf, I retrieved a small wrapped box, a dress watch I had spent 2 weeks selecting for George. Nothing extravagant. Something with weight to it, the kind a man notices on his wrist at the end of a long career and thinks, yes, this means something. I set it by the door alongside my coat. Before I left, I reached into the inside breast pocket of the jacket and touched the document I kept there. A single folded paper, a certified copy of the property deed for the house on Byram Shore Road in Greenwich, Connecticut. 4 bedrooms, a backyard that sloped toward Long Island Sound, assessed at just over $1.4 million. My name printed clearly across the top as sole owner of record, stamped and authenticated by the town clerk of Fairfield County. I had carried that copy for 3 years, ever since my attorney, Elena Vasquez, had slid it across her desk and said, "Keep this somewhere safe, Richard, not in a drawer. On you." I had never once thought I would need it. It was the kind of document you carried the way you carried a spare key, out of habit, out of caution, out of a quiet understanding that the world did not always stay as orderly as you left it. I folded it back, patted the pocket once, and picked up my coat. The taxi arrived at 8:45. I settled into the back seat and watched Queens slide past the window, the bodegas and the barbershops, and the old brick buildings with their fire escapes tilted like broken arms. I had lived in this neighborhood for 31 years, raised Claire here after Margaret passed, worked double shifts here so my daughter could go to a school with actual textbooks and a gymnasium that didn't leak when it rained. I was not ashamed of any of it. The drive to Greenwich took just under an hour. As we crossed into Fairfield County, the streets widened and the trees grew taller, and the houses set themselves further back from the road, as though they preferred not to be looked at too directly. By the time the Riverside Club came into view, a sprawling stone building behind a wrought iron fence, its entrance flanked by two stone urns spilling over with white hydrangeas, I had adjusted my tie twice and decided not to adjust it again. The taxi stopped at the gate. A man in a dark uniform stepped forward, clipboard in hand. He looked at the cab. Then he looked at me through the window with the particular expression of someone doing a calculation they had already completed. "Name, sir?" he asked, his voice perfectly courteous and perfectly empty. I told him. He found it on his list, gave a small nod, and waved us through. As the cab rolled up the curved drive, I looked out at the manicured lawn, the gleaming cars lined up along the side. The women in silk dresses moving through the front entrance like they had been doing this all their lives. I thought about Margaret. I thought about what she would have said. Then the driver stopped and I got out, and I walked toward the door. The Riverside Club smelled like money. Not in any obvious way, no one had sprayed wealth into the air vents. But there was something in the combination of fresh-cut lilies in the entrance hall, the faint trace of aged wood and leather from the paneled walls, and the cool, perfectly regulated temperature that told you immediately this was a place where comfort was assumed, not appreciated. I handed my coat to an attendant, who accepted it without making eye contact, and stepped into the main reception room. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Mianus River, glittering in the June afternoon light. Round tables draped in white linen filled the room, each centered with a low arrangement of ivory roses. Somewhere near the back, a pianist worked through something classical that I couldn't name, but recognized as expensive. I counted 60, maybe 65 guests. Every man in the room wore a suit that had been made for him specifically. Every woman carried a bag that cost more than my first car. I straightened my lapel and went to find George. He was standing near the windows with a glass of sparkling water, deep in conversation, with two men whose silver hair and confident posture marked them as former executives of something significant. When he saw me approaching, his face opened into a genuine smile, the kind that reaches the eyes and means it, and he extended his hand before I was even close enough to shake it. "Shard," he said warmly, gripping my hand with both of his. "I'm glad you made it. Claire told me you might have trouble with the drive." "Traffic was fine," I said. "Congratulations, George. 40 years is something to be proud of." 42, he said and laughed. "But who's counting?" He turned to introduce me to the two men beside him, whose names I forgot almost immediately. And for a few minutes, we exchanged the kind of pleasant, weightless conversation that retirement parties are built on. Then Daniel appeared at my elbow. "Dad," he said, using the word with the smooth ease of a man who had practiced it. "Let me get you settled at the table." He guided me across the room with one hand barely touching my shoulder. Steering me, I noticed, away from a cluster of relatives near the bar who had begun to look in our direction. He spoke as we walked, his voice low, and even asking about my drive, mentioning something about the club's history, filling the space between us with words that meant nothing and required nothing in return. Daniel Mercer had always been good at that. He could talk for 10 minutes and leave you feeling like the conversation had just begun. Claire was already seated. When she saw me, she rose halfway from her chair, smiled, and kissed my cheek. Her hand on my arm was brief, her eyes already moving past me toward the room. "You look good, Dad," she said. "I'm glad you came." I wanted to tell her that I was glad too. But something in the way she was holding herself, shoulders slightly drawn, in chin lifted just a fraction too high, told me she was managing something, presenting a version of the afternoon she had already decided on. I sat down. It was Patricia Mercer who found me 20 minutes later. I had seen her working the room from across the space, a tall woman in a cream-colored dress moving between tables with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades being the most important person in any gathering she entered. Daniel's mother, George's wife of 38 years. She had the kind of beauty that had clearly been remarkable once, and had since sharpened itself into something more formidable. She stopped in front of me, and her eyes made a single efficient trip from my collar to my shoes and back again. The whole journey took less than 2 seconds. She had learned to do it so naturally that someone watching might have missed it entirely. I did not miss it. "Richard," she said, her lips curving into a smile that stopped precisely at her cheekbones. "How wonderful that you could join us." "Thank you for having me, Patricia," I said. "George looks happy. You must be proud." "We are," she said. Then she let a small pause settle between us, the kind of pause that is never accidental, and tilted her head slightly. "Though I have to ask." Her voice dropped just enough to carry the intimacy of a confidence while remaining perfectly audible to the couple seated 2 feet away. "Is that what you're wearing today, Richard? To the party?" My chest tightened. Not from shame, from recognition. I knew exactly what this was. I had seen it on construction sites, in city planning meetings, in rooms where men with money decided which other men were worth listening to. The weapon that looks like a question. "It is," I said evenly. "My wife picked it out. I've always liked it." Patricia's smile did not waver. "Of course," she said. "How sentimental." She moved on before I could respond, pausing to greet someone at the next table with a warmth so sudden and complete, it felt like watching someone flip a switch. My jaw was tight. My fingers pressed flat against my thigh beneath the table. I turned toward Claire. My daughter was looking down at the bread plate in front of her, her thumbnail tracing a small circle against the edge of the porcelain. She had heard every word. I could tell by the particular stillness she had taken on the stillness of someone who has decided in real time that they did not hear what they just heard. "Claire," I said quietly. She looked up. Her eyes met mine for just a moment, and in that moment I saw something flicker there. Discomfort. Maybe even guilt. Then Megan, Daniel's younger sister, leaned in from across the table with a bright, careless laugh. "Don't mind Mom," she said, as though she were offering comfort. "She just has very particular taste. It's actually kind of funny when you think about it." She was already reaching for her wine glass before she finished the sentence. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the way she used to say, "Richard, some people only feel tall when they're standing on something." I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. The afternoon, I understood, was just getting started. The lunch service began at 1 o'clock, and for a while things were almost bearable. George held court at the center table, telling stories about his early days in corporate finance with the self-deprecating ease of a man who had earned the right to laugh at himself. The food was exceptional: seared salmon, roasted fingerling potatoes, a salad with ingredients I couldn't identify, but ate anyway. The wine was poured generously. Around me, conversation flowed in that comfortable, practiced way it does among people who have known each other for decades and have long since run out of anything genuinely surprising to say. I kept to myself mostly. I asked George a few questions about his plans for retirement. I complimented the food to the server who refilled my water. I watched Claire across the table, the way she laughed at Daniel's jokes a half-second before they landed, the way her hand rested on his forearm like she was steadying herself. I was doing fine. I told myself I was doing fine. Then Patricia returned. She settled into the chair 2 seats down from me, with the unhurried confidence of a woman reclaiming her territory. And within minutes, she had redirected the conversation at our end of the table toward herself. She spoke about a fundraising gala she was chairing in September. She mentioned a trip to Tuscany she and George were planning. She referenced twice an article in the Greenwich Advocate that had featured the Mercer family's charitable contributions. I listened. I nodded when it seemed appropriate. I refilled my own water glass when the server was occupied elsewhere. Then she turned to me. "Richard," she said pleasantly, "what is it that you did before you retired?" Daniel mentioned something about construction. "Structural engineering," I said. 31 years. Mostly commercial projects in the city. A few infrastructure contracts with the state. How interesting," she said in the tone people use when they mean the opposite. "And do you keep busy now in your retirement?" "I do," I said. "I have a garden. I read. I spend time with Claire when she'll have me." Patricia smiled and reached for her wine glass. "That must be a comfort," she said. "Having family nearby, especially at your age living alone." She paused just long enough to let the words arrange themselves. "It can be so difficult for people in your situation." My situation. I turned the phrase over in my mind. I was a 65-year-old widower who had raised a daughter alone, built a career from nothing, and purchased outright the house these people were currently benefiting from. I was not sure which part of that constituted a situation requiring sympathy from Patricia Mercer, but I kept my expression pleasant and said, "I manage well enough, thank you." Megan laughed from across the table, a bright social laugh that she aimed at no one in particular. "Mom just worries," she said. "She worries about everyone. It's her thing." "I appreciate that," I said. But Patricia wasn't finished. She set her wine glass down and looked at me with an expression of such practiced concern that I almost admired the craft of it. "I only mean," she said, "that these kinds of gatherings, the club, the people here today, they require a certain ease, a familiarity. And I imagine it can feel a bit overwhelming for someone who hasn't spent much time in these circles." My heart knocked hard against the inside of my chest. Not from fear. From the specific physical sensation of being diminished by someone who had decided before I ever walked through the door that I was beneath them. I set my fork down carefully. I made sure my hand was not shaking, though every muscle in my forearm was working to keep it steady. "I've spent plenty of time in difficult rooms, Patricia," I said quietly. "I've negotiated city contracts, managed multi-million-dollar project timelines, and testified before a state infrastructure committee. I think I can manage a lunch." A few heads at the table turned. George looked up from his conversation. Daniel's eyes flicked toward me, and then immediately away toward some neutral point above my left shoulder. Patricia's smile did not falter. If anything, it settled more firmly into place. "Of course," she said warmly. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. I only think some people are more naturally suited to certain environments than others. That's not a judgment, it's simply an observation." She lifted her wine glass again. "I do think some people should know where they belong. It makes everything so much more comfortable for everyone." The table went very still, not silent. There were still sounds, the piano, the soft movement of servers, the low hum of other conversations around the room. But at our table something had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, that particular drop in the atmosphere that tells you something is about to happen. I looked at Claire. My daughter's face had gone the color of old paper. Her hand, which had been resting on the table, slowly curled into a loose fist against the white linen. Her lips pressed together. She was staring at a point somewhere between her bread plate and the centerpiece, and I could see from the slight tremor along her jaw that she was working through something internal, some argument she was having entirely with herself. I held my breath. Claire had grown up watching me handle men twice her size on job sites. She had watched me stay calm in rooms where people tried to take things from me. She knew exactly who I was and what I had built and what it had cost. I waited for her to speak. Her mouth opened, and what she said next broke something in me that I am not sure I have fully repaired since. "Dad," Claire said, "just apologize." 3 words. That was all. 3 words delivered in a low, controlled voice that she had clearly been rehearsing somewhere behind her eyes for the past several minutes. Not shouted. Not emotional. Just stated the way you state something you have already decided is true. I turned to look at my daughter. She was sitting straight in her chair now, both hands flat on the table, her chin lifted at an angle that reminded me painfully of her mother, except that Margaret had only ever lifted her chin like that when she was about to defend something she believed in. Claire was lifting hers to manage me. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Inside my chest, something had lurched sideways like a step you don't see coming in the dark. "You heard me, Dad." Claire's eyes flicked briefly toward Patricia, then back to me. "Just apologize and we can all move on. This is George's day. Please don't make it about something else." I stared at her. I wanted to make sure I had understood correctly. "You want me to apologize," I said slowly, "to the woman who just told a table full of people that I don't know my place." Claire's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped just below her cheekbone. "Patricia was making conversation," she said. "You're reading into things." "Claire, Dad." Her voice dropped, sharpened. "I'm asking you, please. Daniel's family has been very generous to us, and I need today to go smoothly. Can you just for once not make everything harder than it has to be for once?" Those 2 words landed somewhere behind my sternum and stayed there burning quietly. I thought about the night Claire was 9 years old and came home from school with her coat torn because 2 older girls had pushed her into a fence. I had sat with her on the bathroom floor for an hour while she cried, one hand on her back, telling her over and over that what other people thought of her was not the measure of who she was. I thought about the double shifts I had worked the winter she was 14, so she could go on the school trip to Washington, D.C. I thought about every parent-teacher conference I had attended alone, every birthday cake I had made from a box. Because I had never learned to bake properly every morning, I had ironed her school uniform with hands that were still sore from the previous day's work. For once, Daniel had said nothing through any of this. He was studying the middle distance with the practiced blankness of a man who has learned that the safest place to be in a conflict is nowhere at all. George had gone very still, his retirement champagne untouched in front of him, his eyes moving between me and his son with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between discomfort and dawning comprehension. Megan reached for a dinner roll and buttered it with elaborate focus, as though the structural integrity of the bread required her complete attention. "Claire," I said again, and this time my voice did something I hadn't intended. It cracked, just slightly, just once on the single syllable of her name. "You're asking me to apologize for being insulted. I'm asking you to be the bigger person." Her eyes were bright now, not with tears, but with the particular brightness of someone working very hard not to feel what they're feeling. "I'm asking you to think about where we are and who these people are and what this day means to Daniel. Is that really so much to ask, who these people are?" I looked at my daughter for a long moment. My chest ached with a pain that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with it. My hands beneath the table had pressed themselves flat against my thighs, not to hide that they were shaking, but because pressing down on something solid was the only way I could keep myself anchored to the chair. Then Claire leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to something that was almost gentle. "If you can't behave properly in places like this," she said, "then maybe you shouldn't come at all." The table went rigid. George set down his champagne glass with a small, precise click. Daniel finally moved, turning his head away toward the window, toward the river, toward anything that was not this conversation. Patricia brought her wine glass to her lips and drank with the unhurried satisfaction of a woman watching something she had set in motion arrive exactly where she intended. And I sat there with my hands flat against my thighs and my chest full of something I had no name for, looking at the face of the little girl I had raised alone for 20 years. The girl I had held on bathroom floors and driven to school in the dark, and loved with every tired, calloused, imperfect thing I had, and I did not recognize her. That was the worst part. Not the words, the face, the way she looked at me across the white linen table as though I were a problem she was trying to solve. I took one slow breath. Then I reached into the inside breast pocket of my jacket and felt the edge of the folded paper I had carried there for 3 years. "You're right, Claire," I said quietly. "I'll apologize." Something shifted in her expression, relief or the beginning of it. Patricia set her wine glass down. I unfolded the paper beneath the table. Then I laid it on the white linen in front of me, smoothed it flat with one hand, and looked up. "But first," I said, "I think everyone here should see something." The paper lay flat on the white linen, and for a moment nobody moved. It was a single sheet, cream-colored official, stamped in the lower left corner with the seal of the town clerk of Fairfield County, Connecticut. At the top, in clean printed type, were the words that mattered. "Warranty deed property located at 14 Byram Shore Road, Greenwich, Connecticut." And beneath that, in the section marked "Grantor and Grantee, a transaction recorded 4 years before my daughter's wedding. The house transferred into my name, a loan purchased outright, no mortgage, no lien, no co-owner. Richard James Calloway, sole owner of record." I had a second document beside it before anyone at the table had fully processed the Connecticut DMV title certificate for a Toyota Sequoia, registered in my name, purchased the same year. "The house," I said, keeping my voice level and clear, "is mine. It has been since before Claire and Daniel were married. The deed is a public record. Anyone can verify it through the Fairfield County Land Records Office. The vehicle title is registered with the Connecticut DMV under my name alone." I looked around the table. Both were gifts of use, not of ownership. My attorney advised me to keep the titles in my name, and I followed that advice. The chandelier above us threw its light down onto the paper with complete indifference. George reached across the table. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, the way a man reaches for something he is not sure he wants to touch. He picked up the deed and held it at reading distance, his jaw working slightly as his eyes moved line by line down the page. His retirement champagne sat forgotten at his elbow, the bubbles going flat. Patricia had stopped breathing. I could see it the way her chest had gone still beneath her cream dress, the way her wine glass was suspended halfway between the table and her mouth arrested in mid-motion, like a film someone had paused. Daniel's face had lost all its color. Every carefully maintained plane of it, the easy confidence, the social warmth, the practiced pleasantness he wore like a second suit, had simply drained away, leaving something underneath that I had never seen on him before. He looked for the first time since I had known him genuinely afraid. Claire's hands flew to her mouth. "Dad!" she whispered through her fingers, her voice cracked open and raw. "What is this?" "It's the deed to your home, Claire," I said. "The one your husband told his family he purchased." A sound escaped her, not quite a word, not quite a cry. Something in between, something that seemed to come from a place she hadn't known existed until this moment. Her eyes filled so fast, it looked involuntary, like a physical reaction she had no control over, and she pressed her fingers harder against her lips, as though she could hold back whatever was trying to get out. George looked up from the paper. His eyes found his son across the table, and something in his expression, something I can only describe as the look of a man watching a wall he built himself begin to crack, made my chest ache despite everything. "Daniel," George said. His voice was quiet, carefully quiet the way men get when they are controlling something large. "You told us you bought this house." Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. His throat moved. "How you told your mother," George continued, and now there was something underneath the quiet, not anger, yet but the ground that anger grows from. "You told your sister. You told every person at our table at Thanksgiving 2 years ago that you had purchased that property before the wedding." He set the deed down between them. "Is that true?" Daniel's hand gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles went white. "It's complicated," he said finally. The words came out hoarse, stripped of everything. "It is not complicated," I said. "A deed is a legal document. It says what it says. The property at Byram Shore Road has been in my name since I purchased it outright 6 years ago. Your son has been living in it. That is the full extent of the arrangement." Megan had pushed her chair back from the table by several inches, as though she wanted to establish physical distance from whatever was happening. Her dinner roll sat untouched on her plate. Patricia set her wineglass down. The sound it made against the table was very small and very final. The color had left her face in stages first, the flush of social confidence, then the warmth, then the underlying assurance, until what remained was something unguarded and almost unfamiliar. She looked suddenly like a woman who had just realized the ground beneath her was not what she had been told it was. I gathered both documents from the table, folded them carefully, and returned them to the inside breast pocket of my jacket, the same pocket where Elena Vasquez had told me 3 years ago that I should always keep a certified copy. I smoothed the front of my jacket once. Then I stood and I looked at George. Only George, because he was the only person at that table I still felt I owed something to. And I said, "Happy retirement, George. You've earned every year of it." I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. Behind me I heard Patricia say my name, "Richard, wait." Her voice stripped of every layer of careful social armor it had carried all afternoon, left with nothing but urgency underneath. I did not turn around. I had said what needed to be said. I had said it without raising my voice, without cruelty, without anything except 2 pieces of paper and the truth that had always been printed on them. The walk to the exit felt very long and very quiet, and I kept my chin level the entire way. The cab ride back to Queens took 53 minutes. I know because I watched the meter. I needed something concrete to look at, something that moved in small, predictable increments, because if I looked out the window at the darkening Connecticut countryside, at the wide lawns and the stone walls and the houses set back from the road like they were embarrassed to be seen, I was going to feel something I wasn't ready to feel yet. So I watched the meter. I counted the minutes. I kept my hands loose in my lap and my jaw unclenched. And I breathed the way a doctor had told me to breathe after Margaret died, slowly from the bottom of the lungs, like you're filling something that has been emptied. I got home at 9:17. The apartment was dark. I didn't turn the lights on right away. I set my keys on the hook by the door, hung up my coat, and sat down in the armchair by the window, the one Margaret had reupholstered herself the summer before she got sick, in a fabric she called dusty sage, that I had always privately thought looked gray. I sat in it with my jacket still on and my hands on my knees, and I stared at the middle distance while the city outside did what it always did, moved and honked and lit itself up and kept going without asking permission from anyone. My phone buzzed. Claire. I let it ring through. It buzzed again almost immediately. Then a third time 30 seconds after that. Then a gap. Then a text message which I did not open. On the shelf across the room, Margaret's photograph caught the ambient light from the window. Her face slightly turned, laughing at something outside the frame. We had been married 22 years before she died. 22 years of her ironing my shirts and arguing with me about the thermostat, and sitting exactly like that, turned slightly away with that laugh on her face, making whatever room she was in feel like the right place to be. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, Margaret, I said out loud to the photograph and to the dark room and to no one. She didn't answer. She never did. But sometimes the silence had a quality to it, a particular density that felt like the next best thing. The phone buzzed again. This time the screen showed a number I didn't recognize. I let that one go too. I didn't sleep well. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and replayed the afternoon in pieces, Patricia's wine glass, suspended in midair, George's hands, on the deed, the sound Claire had made when she pressed her fingers to her mouth. That sound. I had heard my daughter cry hundreds of times over the years, from scraped knees, from teenage heartbreaks, from the night we sat together at Margaret's bedside, and understood that some things could not be fixed. But the sound she made at that table was different. It wasn't grief. It was the sound of something cracking open that she had been holding shut for a long time. I wasn't sure whether that made me feel better or worse. Sunday morning came gray and humid, the kind of June day that can't decide whether it wants to rain. I made coffee, stood at the kitchen window and drank it while the pigeons on the fire escape argued with each other about something. At 8:42, Claire called again. This time I answered. Dad. Her voice was different from last night. The rawness was gone, packed away somewhere, replaced with something tighter and more controlled. We need to talk about what happened yesterday. I agree, I said. You humiliated Daniel in front of his entire family. The words came out clipped and precise, like she had been arranging them since last night. In front of his father's colleagues, his friends, people who have known the Mercer family for decades. Do you have any idea what you did? My free hand tightened around the edge of the counter. I showed a piece of paper, Claire, a legal document with my name on it. That's all I did. That's all you... She stopped, took a breath. Dad Daniel is humiliated. His mother is devastated. His father barely spoke at dinner last night. And you think you just showed a piece of paper. I think someone at that table needed to hear the truth, I said. And I think it had been a long time coming. The truth. Her voice went flat. You want to talk about the truth? The truth is that Daniel has provided for this family. Claire. My voice came out harder than I intended, hard enough that she stopped mid-sentence. I purchased that house. I have the deed. I have the title to the car. These are not opinions. They are recorded documents that anyone in Connecticut can look up from their kitchen table. Please do not ask me to apologize for facts. A long pause crackled over the line. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into something that frightened me more than her anger. Something cold and decided. Then I don't know what else there is to say, Dad. She ended the call. I set the phone down on the counter. My hand was trembling just slightly, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding everything in place while the conversation was happening, and the sudden release now that it was over. I pressed my palm flat against the countertop and breathed through it. It was 2 hours later that someone knocked at my door. Jim Kowalski from 4B, a retired postal worker I had known for 11 years, a decent man who brought me soup when I had my knee surgery, and whose opinion I had never had reason to doubt. He stood in the doorway in his Sunday sweater, turning his cap in his hands, with the particular discomfort of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have. "Richard," he said carefully, "I heard something this morning. From Donna at the end of the hall. She's friends with someone in your daughter's neighborhood." He paused. "I heard you're trying to take the house back from Claire, that you're using some kind of legal trick to get it away from her and her husband." The words hit me like cold water. I looked at Jim, at his honest, uncomfortable face, and I understood immediately. This had not started with Donna at the end of the hall. This had started with a phone call or several phone calls made from Greenwich the previous evening to everyone who might be listening. "Thank you for telling me, Jim," I said quietly. He nodded still, turning his cap, clearly relieved the conversation was almost over. "I didn't think it sounded right," he said. I thought you should know what's going around." I thanked him again and closed the door. Then I stood in my hallway for a moment, one hand still on the door handle, and felt the full weight of what was happening settle across my shoulders, like something physical. They weren't going to let this be over. I went to the kitchen table, picked up my phone, and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 3 months. Elena Vasquez, my attorney. "Elena," I said when she picked up on the second ring. "It's Richard Calloway. I need to see you Monday morning." Something has changed. Elena Vasquez's office on the 31st floor of a midtown Manhattan building had 2 things I always noticed when I walked in. The view of Central Park, which was genuinely beautiful in a way that still surprised me after all these years, and the complete absence of anything unnecessary. No family photographs, no decorative plants, no motivational prints on the wall. Just clean lines, a large desk, 2 chairs for clients, and the kind of stillness that told you the person who worked here did not waste time on things that didn't matter. Elena herself was 51, with dark hair pulled back and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck that she picked up and put down constantly, like punctuation. She had been my attorney for 9 years, handled Margaret's estate, the purchase of the Greenwich property, a contract dispute I'd had with a subcontractor in 2019. She was not warm in the way that made you feel comfortable. She was warm in the way that made you feel safe, which is a different thing entirely. She was already at her desk when I arrived at 9 o'clock Monday morning. She waited until I had sat down and settled before she spoke. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning. Don't edit." So I did. I told her about the party, about Patricia's comments, about Claire's request that I apologize about the deed I had placed on the table, and the expressions on the faces around it. I told her about the cab ride home and the phone call Sunday morning, and Jim Kowalski turning his cap in his hands in my doorway. Elena listened without interrupting. She picked up her reading glasses twice and set them down again. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and looked at me for a moment with the particular expression she wore when she was organizing what she wanted to say. "Claire and Daniel have no lease agreement with you," she said. It wasn't a question. "Correct," I said. "They never did. The arrangement was always informal. The house was mine. They lived there. I paid the property taxes and the insurance." Which means? Elena said that under Connecticut law, they are licensees, not tenants. They have no legal claim to remain in the property. You do not need their consent to sell. You do not need to negotiate. You need to provide reasonable notice in Connecticut. That typically means 30 days written notice, delivered in a legally recognized manner. She paused. "Richard, do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I think so," I said. "I'm telling you that if you want to sell that house, there is nothing stopping you." She held my gaze. "The deed is in your name alone. The property was purchased with your funds before the marriage. It was never commingled into a marital asset. Daniel Mercer has no legal claim to it. Neither does Claire, unless you voluntarily transfer ownership, which you have never done. My hands were very still on my knees. How long would it take? I asked. To sell? Elena picked up a pen, turned it once between her fingers. In Greenwich, with the right listing price and a motivated buyer, could be 30 days, could be 90. If we find a cash buyer who waives inspection contingencies, we could close in 3 weeks. She set the pen down. But I want to ask you something first, and I want you to think about it before you answer. Go ahead. Are you doing this because you're angry? She asked. Or are you doing this because it's the right decision for you? The question landed squarely in the middle of my chest. I sat with it for a moment. Really sat with it the way Elena had trained me to sit with things over 9 years of working together. I thought about Sunday morning standing at the kitchen window with my coffee going cold, listening to Claire tell me that I had humiliated her husband. I thought about Jim Kowalski at my door. I thought about the phone calls that were probably still going out from Greenwich to anyone willing to listen, painting me as a bitter old man trying to take something from his daughter. And underneath all of that, underneath the anger, underneath the hurt, I found something quieter. Something that had been sitting there for a long time without my fully acknowledging it. I've given them everything I had to give, I said slowly. The house, the car. 5 years of looking the other way, while Daniel let his mother believe he'd built something he hadn't. 5 years of watching Claire choose that story over the truth. I looked at Elena. I can give a person a house. I cannot make them respect me. And I think I have been waiting a very long time for those two things to be the same, and they are not. Elena looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a standard authorization form. I'll need you to sign this, she said. It authorizes me to act as your representative in the listing and sale of the property. She slid it across the desk. I'll have the 30-day notice prepared today and delivered by certified mail that creates a legal record of receipt. We'll list the property this week. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. Elena, I said before I signed. Do I need to tell Claire? She met my eyes. You are under no legal obligation to notify anyone other than the current occupants, which the certified mail notice will accomplish. She paused. Whether you want to tell her as a courtesy is a different question. That one I can't answer for you. I thought about Claire's voice on the phone Sunday morning. Cold and decided. I don't know what else there is to say, Dad. I signed the form. Elena took it back, reviewed it once, and set it in the folder on her left. Then she looked up at me with something that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite approval, but was somewhere in between. Go home, Richard, she said. Let me work. I stood, buttoned my jacket, picked up my coat from the back of the chair. At the door, I paused. Elena, I said, thank you. For everything you've done over the years. She picked up her reading glasses and settled them on her nose. You can thank me when it's done, she said, already looking at the next document on her desk. Go. I went. In the elevator down, I pulled out my phone. There was a new text from Claire sent while I was upstairs. I could see the first line in the notification preview without opening it. Dad, are you ready to apologize yet? Daniel's family is very... I put the phone back in my pocket. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby. I walked out into the Monday morning noise of Midtown Manhattan, the taxis and the construction, and the 10,000 people going somewhere with purpose. And for the first time since Saturday afternoon, I felt like I was one of them. The moving company sent 2 men. They arrived at 7 in the morning in a white truck that idled in the driveway of 14 Byramshore Road while they worked, and they did their job with the efficient, incurious professionalism of people who have spent their careers moving through other people's most significant moments without being invited into them. They did not ask questions. They did not make conversation. They wrapped and lifted and loaded, and I stayed out of their way. I had told Elena to sell the house furnished. The furniture belonged to Claire and Daniel. I had never owned any of it. What I had come for was smaller than that. A cardboard box half full. The things that had traveled with Margaret and me from apartment to apartment in our early years, that had survived 3 moves and a flood in 2003, and the long adjustment of learning to live in a house big enough to echo. I went through the rooms slowly while the 2 men worked around me. The kitchen first. On the windowsill above the sink where the morning light came through, strongest, Claire had kept a small ceramic rooster that had belonged to Margaret, a ridiculous thing painted in reds and yellows that Margaret had bought at a church sale for $2 and declared perfect. I wrapped it in a dish towel and set it in the box. The living room, on the built-in bookshelf near the fireplace, tucked between a dictionary and a novel Claire had never finished, was a photograph in a plain wooden frame, Margaret and me on the front steps of our first apartment in Astoria the year we got married. She was laughing. I was looking at her instead of the camera. I took it off the shelf and held it for a moment, and my chest did something complicated and private, and then I wrapped it and put it in the box. The hallway. In the narrow drawer of the console table by the front door, the one where Claire kept takeout menus and dead batteries and the miscellaneous debris of daily life, I found a photograph I had not known was there. Claire, at 8 years old, gap-toothed and squinting into the sun, holding up a fish she had caught at a lake upstate with both hands grinning with her whole face. I stood in the hallway with that photograph in my hands and felt something move through me that I did not have a clean name for, not grief exactly, not anger exactly. Something older than both of those things. Something that sat in the space between who a person was and who they became, and asked you quietly where exactly the distance had opened up. I put the photograph in my jacket pocket, not the box, my pocket. At 10:47, my phone rang. Elena. Richard, she said, it's done. The wire cleared this morning. $1,470,000 net of fees. The buyer took possession as of 9 o'clock, cash transaction, no inspection contingency, closed in 22 days. A brief pause. Congratulations. You no longer own property in Greenwich. I was standing in the doorway of what had been Claire's guest room. A room painted a soft blue that she had chosen herself, with curtains she had hemmed by hand one Saturday afternoon, while I sat in the armchair and watched her work, both of us listening to a baseball game on the radio. The walls were bare now. The curtains were still there. Thank you, Elena, I said. The 30-day notice was properly served, and the occupants vacated last week. She continued. Everything is clean. No liens, no disputes, no complications. Another pause, shorter this time. Are you all right? I'm fine, I said. I'm fine. Thank you. I ended the call and stood there a moment longer in the doorway of the blue room, looking at the curtains Claire had hemmed, and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not the legal completion of a real estate transaction, but the closing of something larger and less definable, something that had begun 6 years ago when I handed over the keys to this house and told my daughter that I wanted her to have a good life. I had wanted that. I still wanted that. I just no longer believed that giving her things was the same as giving her what she needed. One of the movers appeared at the end of the hallway. We're all loaded up, sir, he said. Whenever you're ready. 1 minute, I said, I went back through the rooms one more time, not looking for anything, just walking. The kitchen, with its empty windowsill. The living room with the rectangle of slightly less faded paint where Margaret's photograph had hung. The front hallway with its console table and its drawer of takeout menus that were no longer my concern. At the front door, I stopped and pressed my hand flat against the doorframe. The wooden frame I had inspected carefully before I bought the house, running my thumb along the joints and the grain, the way a structural engineer does out of habit checking for things that needed attention. It had been solid then. It was solid now. I picked up my box and my coat and walked out. The moving truck pulled away ahead of me. I stood on the front path for a moment in the July heat, looking back at the house. The red brick, the windows with their white trim, the backyard beyond, where on a clear day you could see a strip of Long Island Sound between the trees. I had bought this house because I wanted my daughter to have something that lasted, something that wouldn't move when the world moved around it. The taxi to JFK arrived at 11:20. I got in, set my box on the seat beside me, and watched Greenwich recede through the back window, the wide streets and the tall trees, and the large, confident houses going about their business in the summer heat. I thought about Claire. I thought about what she would feel when the realtor's call came through. I thought about what I would say when she called me. Then I thought about Santa Barbara, which I had never been to, and the apartment I had rented sight unseen from a listing online, third-floor ocean view, 2 bedrooms available immediately. And I turned forward in my seat and looked at the road ahead instead. My phone showed 7 missed calls, 6 from numbers I didn't recognize, 1 from Claire. I switched it to airplane mode and put it in my pocket. The flight boarded at 1:15. I found my seat, stowed my carry-on, and settled in with my box on my lap and my hand resting on top of it. Through the oval window, the tarmac shimmered in the heat. Somewhere below me, in a drawer in a house that no longer belonged to me, there were probably still takeout menus from restaurants that had closed and dead batteries that needed replacing and the ordinary, irreplaceable clutter of a life being lived. I pressed my forehead briefly against the cool of the window. Then the engines engaged, and New York fell away beneath me, and I closed my eyes. The pilot announced our initial descent into Santa Barbara at 2:47 in the afternoon Pacific time. I reached into my shirt pocket and switched off airplane mode. The phone took a moment to find the local network, that small delay, while the screen searched for a signal which I had always found strangely suspenseful, like watching someone decide whether to answer a door. Then the notifications arrived all at once, stacking up in a cascade that made the phone vibrate steadily in my hand for several seconds. 14 missed calls, 3 voicemails, a string of text messages. 11 of the calls were from numbers I didn't recognize, the kind of volume that told me Patricia Mercer had been busy over the past several hours, working her way through an address book and constructing a version of events that would reach as many people as possible before I had the chance to offer a different one. 2 calls were from Claire. 1 was from Daniel. The first time he had called me directly in 5 years of marriage to my daughter. I put the phone face down on the tray table and looked out the window. Santa Barbara was coming into view below the coast, curved and sun-bleached, the Pacific stretching out beyond it in every shade of blue I had ever seen and several I hadn't. It was, I thought, exactly what I had needed it to be. Wide and indifferent and completely unconcerned with anything that had happened at the Riverside Club 3 weeks ago. The wheels touched down. I turned the phone face up, found Claire's name, and called her back. She answered before the first ring had finished. "Dad." Her voice was tight and airless, the voice of someone who had been holding a breath for hours. "What did you do?" "The realtor called this morning. They said the house was sold, that someone moved in today." A pause, thin and sharp as a paper cut. "Dad, what did you do?" I sold the house, Claire," I said. My voice came out steady. I had not planned for it to sound so, but there it was. A sound came through the phone, not quite a word, not quite a cry, something in between, the same involuntary sound she had made at the table in Greenwich when she first saw the deed. It lasted only a second, and then she pulled herself back together with an effort I could almost hear. "You can't do that," she said. Her voice had shifted, the airlessness replaced by something harder, something that wanted to sound certain. "That is our home. You don't have the right, Claire." I kept my voice quiet. "Whose name was on the deed?" A beat of silence. "That doesn't matter." "It does matter," I said. "It's the only thing that matters legally speaking. The property at Byram Shore Road was recorded in my name with the Fairfield County Land Records Office. I purchased it outright before your wedding. I had the legal right to sell it at any time with 30 days written notice to the occupants, which my attorney delivered by certified mail 3 weeks ago." I paused. "You signed for it, Claire." "I have the delivery confirmation." Another sound came through the line, this one different. Lower, like something giving way under pressure that had been building for too long. "You planned this," she said. "You planned this before you even came to the party." "No," I said. "I carried that deed because my attorney advised me to keep a certified copy with me at all times. I had carried it for 3 years without ever thinking I would need it. What happened at that party was not something I planned. Dad." Her voice broke on the word just slightly, just once, and she drove straight through it like she hadn't noticed. "That is the house where Noah took his first steps. That is where Daniel and I have built our life. You cannot just take that away because you were upset about a party." And there it was. I had known it was coming, the reframing, the reduction of everything that had happened into a version where I was a petulant old man who had overreacted to a social slight. My jaw tightened. Outside the window, the Santa Barbara terminal slid past as the plane taxied toward the gate. "I want to ask you something," I said. "And I need you to actually listen before you answer." "Dad." Claire. Firm. Not loud. Firm. "Do you remember what you said to me at the Riverside Club, not what your mother-in-law said?" "What you said." A pause. Longer this time. "You told me," I continued quietly, "that if I couldn't behave properly in places like that, maybe I shouldn't come at all. You said that. To me. In front of Daniel's family and his father's colleagues and 30 other people who had never met me before that afternoon." My voice did not shake. I was proud of it for that. "You told your father that he didn't belong." The line went very quiet, not the quiet of someone who has nothing to say, the quiet of someone who has just been handed back their own words and is feeling the weight of them for the first time. "So I found my place," I said. "That's what I did, Claire. You told me where I didn't belong. I took you at your word." "That's not..." She stopped, started again. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "Then what did you mean?" I asked. "Because I have been trying to understand it for 3 weeks, and that is the only interpretation that makes sense to me." A long, unsteady breath came through the phone. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its hardness. What was underneath it was rawer and younger, and reminded me painfully of the girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, because she said my breathing was the most calming sound she knew. "Sigh. Daniel said he bought that house," she said. "Not an accusation, just a statement, small and uncertain. He told me. He told me he'd saved for years before we met and that the house was his, and that she stopped. He said your name was on the deed for tax reasons. I know what he told you, I said gently. Is any of it true? I looked out the window at the Santa Barbara sky, blue and clear and vast, the kind of sky that makes the problems of the world seem briefly the right size. The deed has my name on it, I said. It has always had my name on it. That is the truth, and it is a matter of public record that you can verify yourself through the Connecticut Land Records Office online. I am not asking you to take my word for it. The line went quiet again. This time it stretched 5 seconds, 10, and I let it. I did not fill it. Claire, I said finally. When you are ready to talk about what actually happened, not the version Daniel gave you, but what actually happened, I will be here. You have my number. You know how to find me. Dad, wait. I love you, I said. That has not changed. None of what I have done changes that. I ended the call before she could answer. My hands, I noticed, were not shaking. They were very still in my lap, the hands of a man who had said exactly what he meant to say and meant every word of it. The plane stopped. The seatbelt sign went off with a soft chime. Around me, passengers began standing and reaching for overhead bins with the eager, slightly frantic energy of people who had been sitting still too long. I stayed in my seat for another moment. Through the window, the terminal of Santa Barbara Airport sat low and Spanish-style against the afternoon sky, with red roof tiles and white stucco walls and palm trees that stood in a row like they were waiting for something pleasant to happen. It looked nothing like New York. That was the point. I picked up my box from the seat beside me, stood and joined the line of people moving toward the exit. Outside, the air smelled like the ocean. I had not smelled the ocean in years. Before I tell you what Robert found, and I promise you, this is the part nobody saw coming, drop a comment with the number 10 so I know you're still here with me. Because what happened next didn't just surprise me. It changed everything. Heads up, this story contains some fictional elements built around a very real message. If that's not for you, no hard feelings, you can step away right now. But if you're staying, you'll want to hear this next part. I had been in Santa Barbara for 2 weeks when I began to understand what quiet actually felt like. Not the quiet of a house where someone has just left, which has its own specific weight and texture. Not the quiet of a hospital waiting room or a phone that has stopped ringing. The quiet of a place that has never been asked to be anything other than what it is: salt air and morning light, and the particular rhythm of waves that don't care what happened to you last month in Connecticut. I had settled into a routine the way you settle into a new pair of shoes, carefully with some initial discomfort, until one morning you realize you've stopped noticing. I woke at 6, made coffee, sat on the small balcony off the living room with the sliding door open, and watched the Pacific do what it had been doing for considerably longer than any of my problems had existed. I walked along Cabrillo Boulevard in the late mornings, past the beach volleyball nets and the tourists on rental bikes, and found a coffee shop on State Street, where the counter staff learned my order by the 4th day and stopped asking. I was not happy exactly, but I was, for the first time in a very long time, not performing anything for anyone. The knock at my door came at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning. I was still in the kitchen, still in my robe, still on my first cup of coffee. I was not expecting anyone. I had not given my address to more than 3 people, and 2 of them were Elena Vasquez and the leasing office downstairs. The third was Robert Nash. He stood in the doorway with a carry-on suitcase at his feet and his gray vest jacket slightly rumpled in the way that happens when you have been sitting in a plane seat for 6 hours without taking it off. He was 63 years old, 2 inches shorter than me, with close-cropped silver hair, and the particular quality of stillness that men develop after decades of walking into rooms where they needed to notice everything before anyone noticed them. He had spent 27 years as a special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division before retiring 4 years ago to run a private investigations consultancy out of an office in Brooklyn that he shared with a retired DEA agent and a very large potted fern. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face in 30 years of friendship. "I took the red-eye from JFK," he said. "We need to talk." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. In 30 years, Robert Nash had never shown up at my door unannounced. Not once. He was not that kind of man. He was the kind of man who scheduled things 2 weeks in advance and confirmed the day before, and arrived exactly on time. The fact that he was standing at my door in a rumpled vest at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning with a carry-on suitcase, and that expression on his face, told me more than anything he could have said. I stepped back from the door. "Come in," I said. He came in. He set his suitcase by the door. He looked around the apartment, the bare walls, the cardboard box of Margaret's things, still sitting on the kitchen counter where I hadn't yet decided where to put them. The open balcony door with the sound of the ocean coming through it. And then he sat down at the kitchen table without being invited to, which was how I knew it was serious. "Coffee?" I asked. "Please," he said. I poured him a cup and sat down across from him. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at me the way I had seen him look at evidence boards methodically assembling something. "How much do you know about Mercer Distribution, LLC?" he asked. I felt something tighten in my chest. "Daniel's company," I said. "He distributes consumer goods, household products, personal care items, that kind of thing. Warehouses in New Jersey and outside of Los Angeles." Robert nodded slowly. "What do you know about its financial situation?" "Claire mentioned once that they'd had a difficult quarter," I said. "Maybe 8 months ago. I didn't ask for details." Robert set his mug down. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and produced a folded document 3 pages printed with highlights in yellow and red. He laid it on the table between us and smoothed it flat with one hand. "Mercer Distribution, LLC has been under federal investigation for 14 months, he said. "Joint Operation FBI Financial Crimes and IRS Criminal Investigation. The company owes approximately $3.8 million across a combination of fraudulent vendor contracts, falsified distribution records, and systematic underreporting of taxable income going back 6 years. He tapped the first highlighted section. "Wire fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1343, that's the FBI's jurisdiction. Tax evasion under Title 26, Section 7201, that's the IRS. When the two agencies work together on something like this, it is because the case is large enough and complex enough that neither wants to handle it alone." I looked at the document. My eyes moved across the highlighted lines without fully processing them, yet the way your eyes move across a page when the information is arriving faster than your understanding can accommodate it. "Daniel," I said. "Daniel." Robert confirmed. "And at least 2 other officers of the company. The investigation has been building for over a year. They are close, very close to the point where charges will be filed." He paused, and something in the pause had weight to it. "Richard, I need you to hear the next part carefully." I looked up from the document. Robert's hands were flat on the table. His voice was even and deliberate, the voice he used, I knew from experience, when he needed someone to understand something precisely and completely on the first try. "In the course of their preparation, Daniel and his associates have been constructing a secondary narrative," he said. A paper trail designed to suggest that the financial irregularities at Mercer Distribution were not initiated by Daniel, but by an outside party who directed funds and influenced transactions from a position of family trust. He held my gaze. They have been inserting your name into documents, Richard. Your signature scanned from legitimate paperwork you signed years ago, digitally altered and placed into fraudulent transaction records. Under 18 U.S. Code Section 1028A that constitutes aggravated identity fraud, a federal felony carrying a mandatory 2-year sentence on top of whatever underlying charges apply. He stopped. They are building a case that you are responsible for what they did. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the Pacific moved against the shore with complete indifference, the same way it had been doing all morning, the same way it would keep doing long after this conversation was over. My coffee had gone cold in my hand. I had not noticed. My son-in-law, I said, is trying to make me the criminal. Robert did not look away. Yes, he said. And they believe you are an elderly man living alone 2,000 miles from anyone who might help you, who will be too confused or too frightened to fight back effectively. He reached across the table and tapped the document once firmly. They are wrong on every count. But Richard, his voice dropped slightly. They are going to need something from you to complete what they're building. They will find a way to contact you. They will make it sound reasonable. And whatever they ask you to sign, whatever it is, however small it seems, you cannot touch it. I set my coffee cup down on the table. My hands were not shaking. I was surprised to find that they were not shaking. There was something happening in my chest that was large and cold and not entirely pleasant, but my hands were completely steady, and I held on to that. "Show me everything," I said. Robert reached down, unzipped his carry-on, and lifted out a manila folder 3 inches thick. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. The coffee shop on Anacapa Street had a corner table near the window that Robert had already claimed by the time I arrived Thursday morning, 3 days after he had appeared at my door. He had spent those 3 days going through the folder with me piece by piece, methodically, the way he had apparently spent 27 years, going through evidence, not rushing toward conclusions, but building toward them the way a structural engineer builds toward load capacity, testing each connection before trusting it with weight. I had recognized the approach because it was not entirely unlike my own. 8 documents lay arranged across the table when I sat down. Robert had ordered me a coffee without asking, black, no sugar, the way I had been drinking it for 40 years. And Elena Vasquez's face looked up at us from Robert's laptop screen, reading glasses on her office window behind her, showing a gray New York morning that looked nothing like the California sunshine coming through the window beside our table. "Good morning, Richard," Elena said. "Elena," I said, "tell me what I'm looking at." She picked up a document on her end, a scan of what appeared to be a transfer authorization form. "This is the most dangerous one," she said. "It bears your signature or something that appears to be your signature authorizing a transfer of $82,000 from a Mercer Distribution operating account to a shell company registered in Delaware. The transfer date is listed as 14 months ago." She set it down. "You were in Queens 14 months ago. You have never authorized any transfer from any Mercer account. Your signature was taken from the property deed you signed 6 years ago, digitally isolated, scaled, and placed onto this document." She paused. "It is very well done. A non-specialist would not catch it." My eyes moved across the document. My name. My signature or something wearing its shape. Attached to a transaction I had never heard of in an amount I had never seen, connected to a company I had never known existed. The coffee Robert had ordered for me sat untouched at my elbow. My stomach had closed for business. How many documents? I asked. 6 with your name directly, Robert said. 2 others that reference you by relationship, family, investor, private backer. Together, they create a narrative that you were a silent financial participant in Mercer Distribution, that you directed certain irregular transactions, and that Daniel was acting at your instruction. He tapped the edge of the papers. It is the kind of story that is very difficult to disprove once it is in front of a federal jury, because the documents look real and juries trust documents. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my back teeth. They need one more thing, Elena said. Her voice was careful, the voice she used when she wanted to make sure something landed exactly right. A current signature. Something you sign now in the present that places you in a direct and recent relationship with the company. Once they have that, the historical documents become part of a pattern rather than isolated anomalies. A pattern is a conviction, Richard. An anomaly is reasonable doubt. They're going to ask me to sign something, I said. Yes, she said. And it will not look like what it is. It will look like paperwork, a family matter, something small and reasonable and easy. She leaned forward slightly toward her camera. You cannot sign anything, not a birthday card with a financial reference, not a letter of support. Nothing with your name on it that connects you to Daniel Mercer or his company in any capacity. I looked out the window. On the sidewalk outside, a woman was walking a golden retriever that was pulling enthusiastically toward a discarded sandwich wrapper, and she was laughing at it, and the whole scene was so completely ordinary that it felt like something from a different universe than the one I was currently sitting in. My daughter's husband, I said, spent 5 years living in my house. I paid the property taxes on that house. I carried his family's dignity on my back every time Patricia Mercer told someone her son had built something he hadn't. My voice came out lower than I intended, rougher. And now he wants to put me in a federal prison to save himself. Robert did not offer comfort. He had always understood that some moments don't call for comfort, they call for clarity. Yes, he said simply. That is what he wants. The golden retriever outside had gotten its sandwich wrapper. Its owner was trying to extract it gently, still laughing, the dog's tail moving like a propeller. My phone buzzed on the table. I looked at the screen. Daniel Mercer. The first time in 5 years of marriage to my daughter that he had called me more than twice in a single month. Robert and Elena both looked at the screen, then at me. Don't answer, Robert said. Not yet. Let him call 3 times. Then we'll know exactly how badly he needs you. I turned the phone face down on the table. Outside, the woman finally retrieved the sandwich wrapper. The dog looked up at her with the expression of an animal that has absolutely no regrets, and she scratched behind its ears anyway. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and finally took a sip. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. Daniel called 3 more times over the following week. The first time, a Thursday evening, I was sitting on the balcony watching the sun go down over the Pacific, that particular California sunset that looks almost too deliberate, like someone has been paid to arrange the colors. I watched his name light up the screen and let it ring through to voicemail the way Robert had advised. The second call came Saturday morning while I was on my walk along Cabrillo Boulevard. I felt the phone vibrate in my jacket pocket, checked the screen without breaking stride, and kept walking. The woman at the coffee cart near the beach volleyball courts had started recognizing me by then. She handed me my cup without my having to ask. I stood there in the morning sun and drank it while Daniel's call went unanswered, and the ocean did what it always did, and a pelican landed on a piling 20 feet away and regarded me with the profound indifference of a creature that has never once worried about anything. The third call came Tuesday at noon. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when the phone rang. I looked at it. I thought about what Robert had said, let him call 3 times, then we'll know exactly how badly he needs you. I set down the knife and let it ring. That evening, I called Robert. He's called 3 times, I said. I know, Robert said. I've been counting. A brief pause, the kind Robert used when he was deciding how to say something precisely. He'll call again tomorrow, or the day after, when he does answer it. The fourth call came Wednesday afternoon while I was reading on the balcony. I picked up on the second ring. Richard. Daniel's voice came through warm and unhurried, the way it always was when he wanted something, that particular register of his that sat just below genuinely friendly without ever quite reaching it. I'm glad you picked up. I've been thinking about you. Daniel, I said. How are you settling in out there? Claire mentioned Santa Barbara. It's beautiful, isn't it? Patricia and I took a trip there years ago before the kids. He paused just long enough to suggest the memory was pleasant. You deserved the rest, Richard. After everything. I said nothing. I let him talk the way Robert had told me to let a man who is performing give the full performance before you respond to any of it. Listen. Daniel continued, his voice shifting into something slightly more direct, like a man transitioning from small talk to the real agenda with professional smoothness. I know things have been difficult between us, between the families. And I want you to know that I take responsibility for my part in that. The situation with the house, the way things came out at the party, I should have been clearer with my family a long time ago. I know that. He paused, waiting for me to offer something in return. I offered him nothing. The reason I'm calling, he said, the warmth in his voice recalibrating slightly, is that we're hosting an event next month. The Mercer Family Charity Gala, Beverly Hills, Hilton, 3rd Friday of August. We do it every year, raises money for children's literacy programs in underserved communities. Another pause, this one slightly longer. I'd like you to be there, Richard. Claire would like you to be there. I think it would mean a great deal to the family to show that we're moving forward, that we can be in the same room and remember what actually matters. I looked out at the Pacific. A container ship was moving along the horizon, slow and enormous, minding its own business. What night? I asked. Friday the 22nd, he said. 7 o'clock. I can have a car sent for you if you'd like. We'd cover the flight, the hotel, the whole thing. Just say the word. I'll make my own arrangements, I said. A beat of surprise, brief, quickly covered. Of course, he said. Whatever's most comfortable. I really hope you'll come, Richard. I think it would be good for everyone. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I ask, he said warmly. I ended the call and set the phone on the balcony railing and looked at it for a moment as though it were an object I had found on the beach and wasn't sure whether to keep. Then I called Robert. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting. He invited me to a charity gala, I said. Beverly Hills, Hilton, August 22nd. Robert was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Of course he did, he said. Not surprised, not alarmed. The tone of a man whose prediction has just been confirmed. That's where they'll do it. Public venue, 200 witnesses, cameras everywhere. You sign something in a room full of people at a charity event, and it looks like a family reconciliation, not a transaction. He paused. Richard, you are not going to that gala. I looked at the container ship on the horizon. It had moved perhaps a quarter inch since I last looked at it, which is what happens when something very large is moving very slowly toward something very far away. Robert, I said. I'm going. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that I could hear faintly the sound of Brooklyn traffic through his office window. "Richard, they built a trap," I said. "I am going to walk into it. But I am not walking in the same way I walked into the Riverside Club." My voice was steady. My hands were steady. Everything about me in that moment was for perhaps the first time since this had all begun exactly where I needed it to be. "I'm not walking out the same way either." Another silence. Then Robert let out a long breath. "All right," he said. "Then we have 3 weeks. And we are going to need every single day of them." The hotel room in Santa Monica was on the 8th floor, and the window faced west. And at 6 in the evening, the Pacific turned a shade of orange that I was fairly certain had no name in any language I spoke. I had not come to look at it. Robert was already at the desk when I arrived, laptop open, 3 stacks of documents arranged with the precision of a man who had been organizing evidence for most of his adult life. Elena Vasquez appeared on the laptop screen from her New York office. It was 9 o'clock there, and she had been working since 7, and she looked exactly as composed as she always did, which I had long since stopped finding surprising. This was the first time the 3 of us had been in the same conversation, even remotely, since the morning at the coffee shop on Anacapa Street. The 3 weeks since my phone call with Daniel had been spent carefully. Robert building Elena, reviewing both of them, moving with the deliberate patience of people who understood that speed was not the same thing as progress. "Sit down, Richard," Elena said. "We have a lot to cover." I sat. Robert walked me through it methodically. 2 weeks earlier, he had delivered a full evidence package to the FBI's Los Angeles field office. The forged documents, the digital signature analysis conducted by a forensic specialist he knew from his bureau days, the paper trail connecting the Delaware Shell Company to Daniel's personal accounts. The agents assigned to the Mercer distribution case had been building toward action for 14 months. What Robert had delivered gave them the current concrete evidence they needed to move. "They have a warrant," Robert said. "It has been issued and is ready to execute. The agents have confirmed they will be present at the gala." He paused. "They chose the gala specifically because Daniel will be in a public venue with limited exits, surrounded by witnesses, and because if he attempts to pass you fraudulent documents to sign in that context, it constitutes wire fraud in the act, which strengthens the existing case considerably." "So they want him to try," I said. "They want him to try," Robert confirmed. "And we want him to try. Because when he does, and he will, Richard, he has no other option. At this point, the company is out of time. You will not sign anything. You will do something else entirely." He reached into his bag and produced a small device roughly the size of a paperback book, a wireless HDMI transmitter. "This pairs with their existing LED screen system from up to 60 feet, he said. "No cables, no coordination with the hotel AV team, no advance notice required. I plug this into my laptop, walk into that ballroom, and whatever is on my screen goes onto their screen." He set it on the desk. "I have done this before. It takes 11 seconds. Elena leaned forward on her screen. "Richard, your role is simple," she said. "You go to the gala. You let Daniel bring you into the private room. You let him put the documents in front of you. You pick them up, you appear to consider them, and then you say—" She paused. "Whatever feels true to you. And then you walk out of that room and into the ballroom, and Robert will do the rest." I looked at the wireless transmitter on the desk. Such a small thing, I thought, to carry so much weight. We worked through the details for another 2 hours, timing, positioning what Robert would show, and in what order, how Elena had prepared a legal statement that would be filed with the court the following morning, documenting our cooperation with the federal investigation. By the time we finished the Pacific outside, The window had gone from orange to deep blue to the particular shade of black that the ocean becomes when the light is entirely gone and it is simply itself again. Robert and Elena said their good nights. Elena's screen went dark. Robert gathered his documents, wished me a quiet good luck, and went to his room down the hall. I stayed at the window. I was not thinking about warrants or wireless transmitters or the 11 seconds it would take Robert to connect his laptop to a screen in a Beverly Hills ballroom. I was thinking about Claire. She would be there tomorrow night. My daughter. Standing somewhere in that room in whatever she had chosen to wear, beside a man I now understood had been using her the same way he had been using me as furniture in the house of an image he had built around himself. She had believed him. She had chosen his version of the story because his version was easier and because she had wanted, as people do, to believe that the life she was living was the one she thought she was living. I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass of the window. The question that had kept me awake for 3 weeks was not whether the plan would work. The question was what my daughter's face would look like when it did. What she would do with everything that was about to land on her in the middle of a ballroom in Beverly Hills, the truth about her husband, the truth about the money, the truth about every story she had been told and believed and built her life around. I did not have an answer. I had not been able to find one in 3 weeks, and I did not find one standing at that window. At some point I went to bed. In the morning I showered and dressed. I stood in front of the hotel mirror and reached for the suit hanging on the back of the bathroom door, the one I had bought in Los Angeles 2 days earlier. Dark charcoal, well fitted, the kind a man wears when he wants to be taken seriously. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I hung it back up. I opened my travel bag and took out the navy vest jacket instead, the one Margaret had chosen in 1998 on Queens Boulevard, the one I had worn to the Riverside Club in June, the one that had prompted Patricia Mercer to ask, in a voice designed to carry, whether that was really what I was planning to wear. I put it on, straightened the collar, looked at myself in the mirror. I wanted them to remember exactly who was walking through that door. The Beverly Hills Hilton International Ballroom held 212 people that evening, and every one of them was dressed as though they had been specifically notified that cameras would be present. White floral centerpieces. Amber lighting that made everyone look slightly better than they actually were. A jazz quartet near the entrance playing something smooth and unobtrusive. Waitstaff in black moving through the crowd with champagne flutes on silver trays. At the far end of the room, a large LED screen displayed a slow rotation of images, children in classrooms, library shelves, the Mercer Family Foundation logo in tasteful gold on a dark background. Beneath the logo in clean sans serif font, building futures, changing lives. I handed my invitation to the man at the door, a large, professionally courteous man in a dark suit who checked my name against his list with the same expression the gatekeeper at the Riverside Club had used 3 months earlier. This time I did not wait for his assessment of my vest. "Mr. Calloway," I said. "Richard Calloway." He found it, nodded, stepped aside. The room was loud, with the particular noise of 200 people performing their best versions of themselves. Laughter pitched slightly too high, conversations slightly too animated. The collective energy of people who have paid $500 a plate and want to feel that it was worth it. I moved through it, slowly taking stock. Patricia was near the center of the room, working a cluster of guests with the practiced ease of a woman in her natural habitat. She was laughing at something, her head thrown back, her hand on the arm of a man in a tuxedo, and she looked from 20 feet away exactly like a woman with nothing to worry about. She had not seen me yet. Daniel was near the stage, speaking with 2 men, whose body language suggested they were either investors or local officials, or both. He was in a charcoal suit I had never seen before, his posture easy, his smile doing the work it had always done. When his eyes found me across the room, something crossed his face. Quick, controlled, gone in under a second. And then the smile returned slightly wider, and he excused himself from his conversation and moved toward me. Richard. He shook my hand with both of his. His grip was warm and firm and entirely artificial. I'm so glad you came. You look well. Thank you for the invitation, I said. He guided me toward the VIP table near the front, one hand briefly on my shoulder steering, I noticed as he always did. We passed Claire on the way. She was standing near the edge of the room in a dark green dress, a champagne glass held in both hands at her waist. When she saw me, her lips parted. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything else. Her eyes moved from my face to the vest and back again, and I watched something move through her expression that she did not have time to fully process before Daniel said her name and kept us moving. I held her gaze for just a moment. Then George appeared at my elbow. He had positioned himself near a pillar slightly away from the main crowd, and he touched my arm lightly as I passed, barely a touch, just enough to slow me down by a half step while Daniel moved ahead. Richard. His voice was very low. His eyes stayed forward, watching his son's back. I don't know everything that's happening tonight. He paused. The jazz quartet started a new song. But I know my son, and I know what that look on his face means when he's gotten someone into a room. He released my arm. Be careful. Daniel turned back toward us. Dad, there's someone I want you to meet. George straightened and smiled and rejoined the party, and the moment closed behind him like water. Daniel spent the next 40 minutes introducing me to people whose names I forgot almost immediately. A city councilman, 2 foundation board members, a woman who ran a nonprofit in Inglewood and seemed genuinely unaware of what kind of evening she had wandered into. I shook hands and made the appropriate sounds, and watched the room and thought about Robert, who was somewhere in this building with a laptop and an 11-second connection time, and 3 inches of evidence in a manila folder. At 8:41, Daniel touched my arm. Richard, he said, there's something I'd like to go over with you. Privately. He nodded toward a door set into the wall beside the stage. A discreet door, the kind that blends into its surroundings. Just a few minutes, family business. I looked at the door. I looked at Daniel. Of course, I said. The room behind the door was small and well lit, with a round table and 4 chairs, and a water pitcher that nobody had touched. Daniel closed the door behind us. The sound of the ballroom dropped to a murmur. He reached into the inside pocket of his charcoal jacket and produced a folder, slim, dark blue with the Mercer Distribution logo embossed on the cover. He set it on the table in front of me and laid a pen on top of it. A Parker. Gold. The same pen. I was almost certain it was the same pen. Just sign here, Dad, he said. His voice was warm and easy and completely without shame. It's just paperwork. For the family. Before I tell you what I said into that microphone in front of 200 people with Daniel standing 10 feet behind me, comment, ready? If you've been waiting for this moment. Because I have to be honest, so was I. Note this story includes fictional elements added for storytelling purposes. If you've made it this far and this isn't for you, it's okay to step away. For everyone else, here we go. I looked at the pen. I looked at the folder. I looked at Daniel's face that practiced warmth, that absolute confidence, the face of a man who had never once considered that this moment might not go the way he had planned it. Then I picked up the folder, opened it to the first page, and read. It took me 40 seconds. Daniel stood across the table with his hands in his pockets, patient, almost amused, the posture of a man watching someone read a menu at a restaurant he owns. The document was exactly what Elena had described. My name in 3 places, transaction references I had never seen, dates I had never been anywhere near. I closed the folder. I set it back on the table. I did not pick up the pen. Before I sign this, I said, I'd like to go back out there. Daniel's smile flickered just slightly, just once, like a light with a loose connection. Richard, this is a private matter. It'll only take a minute. The people in that room, I said, have been very generous with the Mercer name tonight. They've given their money and their time and their trust. I stood up from the chair. I think they deserve to know what they're supporting. Richard. His voice dropped. The warmth was gone. Underneath it was something I had not heard from him before. Not anger, but something colder than anger. Something that had been waiting behind the performance for a long time. Sit down. No, I said. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, walked to the door, and opened it. The noise of the ballroom rushed back in the laughter and the music and the 200 people who had no idea what was happening, 15 feet away from them. I stepped through the door. Daniel followed, his voice low and urgent at my shoulder, saying things I was no longer listening to. I walked to the edge of the stage. A woman from the foundation was mid-sentence at the podium describing a literacy program in East Los Angeles. She looked up when she saw me approaching and stopped, uncertain the way people stop when something unexpected enters the frame and they cannot immediately categorize it. I stepped up beside her. I leaned toward the microphone. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said. My voice came out through the speakers and filled the room, and everything else went quiet. My name is Richard Calloway. I'm Daniel Mercer's father-in-law. I looked out at 200 faces looking back at me. Before the evening continues, there's something I think everyone here deserves to see. The room had gone completely still. Daniel had stopped moving. He was standing 10 feet behind me, and I did not need to turn around to know that every trace of warmth had left his face entirely. The main doors of the ballroom opened. Robert Nash walked in. He was carrying a laptop under one arm and a small black device in his other hand, the wireless transmitter the size of a paperback book that he had shown me 2 days ago in the Santa Monica hotel room. He walked directly toward the stage without looking at Daniel, without looking at Patricia, without looking at anyone except me. I looked down at Daniel. I believe, I said, you already know my friend Robert. Robert set his laptop on the edge of the stage and connected the wireless transmitter in one practiced motion. 11 seconds. That was what he had told me. I counted them without meaning, to the way you count things when you are standing in front of 200 people with your hands at your sides, and the room is so quiet you can hear the ice settling in the water glasses. The LED screen behind me, the one that had been displaying the Mercer Family Foundation logo in tasteful gold for the past 2 hours, went dark for a single second. Then it came back. The first document filled the screen floor to ceiling. An internal email from 18 months ago, Daniel's name in the sender field, addressed to the 2 officers of Mercer Distribution who had been helping him build the paper trail. The language was careful, corporate, deliberate, but its meaning was not. It described, in the dry vocabulary of financial fraud, exactly how money had been moved, exactly where it had gone, and exactly whose name had been placed on the documents to absorb the legal exposure if the structure collapsed. My name. A sound moved through the room. Not a gasp, something lower and more sustained than that, the sound of 200 people simultaneously recalibrating what kind of evening this had turned out to be. Robert advanced to the second document. The Delaware Shell Company. The $82,000 transfer. My forged signature enlarged to the point where you could see precisely where the digital scaling had distorted the baseline of the letters. a detail invisible at normal size, unmistakable at this one. That signature, I said into the microphone, was taken from a property deed I signed 6 years ago. I did not sign this document. I have never signed any document authorizing any transfer from Mercer Distribution. A forensic analysis confirming this has been filed with the United States District Court for the Central District of California. Patricia's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It did not shatter, it landed on the carpet and rolled, leaving a pale trail. But the sound of it hitting the floor was very loud in the quiet room. She was staring at the screen with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not the social armor, not the practiced warmth, not the cold amusement she had deployed so fluently in Greenwich 3 months ago. Just a woman looking at her son's name on a screen in a room full of people, and understanding for the first time the full dimensions of what he had done. She turned toward Daniel. Daniel was not looking at the screen. He was looking at me, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man watching something he had spent years constructing fall apart in under 4 minutes. "Daniel," Patricia said. Her voice cracked down the middle of his name. "Daniel, what is this?" He did not answer her. His jaw was working, but nothing was coming out. Robert advanced to the 3rd document, then the 4th. Each one landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples moving outward through the crowd, through the foundation board members, and the city councilman, and the woman from the Inglewood nonprofit, and the 200 people who had paid $500 to feel good about themselves this evening, and were now feeling something considerably more complicated. At 9:17, the main doors of the ballroom opened for the 2nd time that evening. 4 people walked in. They wore dark suits and carried credentials that they did not need to display, because the way they moved through a room said everything that needed to be said. 2 from the FBI's Los Angeles Financial Crimes Division, the agents who had received Robert's evidence package 2 weeks earlier and had been waiting with the particular patience of people who do this for a living for exactly this moment. 2 from IRS Criminal Investigation. They had a warrant. It had been issued 3 days ago by a federal magistrate judge in the Central District of California, based on the evidence Robert had delivered, and it covered Daniel Mercer and 2 named associates of Mercer Distribution LLC for wire fraud conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aggravated identity fraud. Daniel saw them before they reached him. He took 1 step backward, just one. Then he stopped because there was nowhere to go, and he straightened. And whatever he did with his face in that moment, I will not describe, because I did not watch it. I was watching Claire. She was standing exactly where she had been standing when I last saw her near the edge of the room, in her dark green dress, her champagne glass still held in both hands at her waist. She was watching her husband being approached by 4 federal agents, and her face was doing something I had no adequate words for. Not shock exactly, or not only shock. Something deeper. The expression of a person whose understanding of the past 5 years is being revised in real time, 1 document at a time. Her eyes found mine across the room. I stepped down from the stage. I walked through the crowd, which parted without my having to ask it to. I walked past Patricia, who had sat down heavily in the nearest chair and was pressing both hands flat against her thighs with her eyes closed, her lips moving slightly as though she were working through something private. I walked past George, who was standing very still near the back wall with his arms at his sides and his head bowed, not in shame exactly, but in the posture of a man absorbing something large. I stopped in front of Claire. Her eyes were bright and full, and her hands were shaking around the champagne glass, and her lower lip was pressed hard against her teeth, the way she had pressed it since she was a little girl when she was trying not to cry in front of people. "Dad," she said. The word came out barely above a breath. I looked at my daughter, at the green dress and the shaking hands and the eyes that were her mother's eyes, filling up with something she did not yet have language for. Not tonight, Claire, I said gently. Not here. I touched her arm once, briefly, just my hand on her sleeve for a single second, and then I walked past her, through the doors, and out into the corridor of the Beverly Hills Hilton, where the carpet was thick and the lighting was warm, and the sounds of what was happening behind me were already beginning to feel like something that had happened to someone else. I stood in the hallway and looked at my watch. 9:32. I thought about Margaret, about the vest she had chosen, about the way she used to say that the truth was always the simplest thing in the room. People just kept dressing it up until nobody recognized it anymore. It's done, I said quietly to no one, to the empty corridor to her. Then I found a chair against the wall, sat down, and waited for Robert. George Mercer found me at 7 the next morning in the lobby of the Santa Monica Hotel, sitting in a chair by the window with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I wasn't paying attention. He looked like a man who had not slept. His jacket was the same one he had worn to the gala, the dark charcoal, now rumpled, the pocket square askew, a man who had sat in his clothes through a long night and not particularly cared. His eyes were red at the rims. He was 65 years old, same as me, and this morning he looked every year of it. He sat down in the chair across from mine without asking whether the seat was taken. For a moment, he just looked out the window at the Pacific, the same ocean I had been watching from my balcony for nearly 7 weeks, doing what it always did, entirely unconcerned with what had happened in a Beverly Hills ballroom the previous evening. Then he said, "I spent 30 years building a reputation on honesty." His voice was low and deliberate, the voice of a man who has been rehearsing something and is now deciding whether the rehearsal was worth anything. 30 years, he said again. And last night I learned that my son spent 10 years building a lie. On top of yours. He stopped. His jaw worked once the way jaws do when something large is being held behind the teeth. I want you to know that I did not know about the documents with your name on them. I knew Daniel was in financial trouble. I did not know how deep. I did not know about the FBI. I did not know what he was planning to do to you. He looked at me directly for the first time. If I had known Richard, I would have come to you myself. I believe you, I said. And I did. He nodded slowly, as though my believing him mattered, and he was not going to pretend it didn't. My attorney contacted the DOJ last night, he said. We are arranging a cooperation agreement. I will provide everything I know, every conversation, every document Daniel showed me, every financial decision I was aware of. It will not save him from what he has done. His voice dropped slightly. But it is the right thing. It is the only thing I know how to do anymore. I said, George, you raised him. You can't live his choices for him. He looked at the window again. The Pacific caught the morning light and threw it back in pieces. How is it, he said quietly, that a man I have known for 5 years has more integrity than my own son? I had no answer for that. Some questions are not looking for answers, they are looking for a witness. I sat with him and let the question exist in the space between us. After a while he stood. He straightened his jacket with both hands, a gesture that seemed less about the jacket and more about the act of straightening something. He extended his hand. I stood and shook it. His grip was firm and held a beat longer than a handshake usually does. Richard, he said. He started to say something else, then stopped. Then started again. Claire did not know about the documents with your name on them. I want you to be clear on that. She knew Daniel was struggling. She knew the company was in trouble. She did not know what he was planning to do to you. His eyes held mine steadily. She found out last night, along with everyone else. He released my hand and walked toward the lobby exit, his back straight, and his steps measured a man carrying something very heavy and choosing not to let it show. I sat back down. My coffee was completely cold. I picked it up anyway and held it in both hands and looked at the door he had walked through. She did not know. 4 words. They did not undo what Claire had said at the Riverside Club. They did not give back the months or the house or the distance between Queens and Santa Barbara. But they rearranged something, shifted the picture by a few degrees, the way turning a photograph toward the light changes what you can see in it. I set the coffee down. Outside, the Pacific went on doing what it always did. Somewhere in Los Angeles, my daughter was waking up to the first morning of a life she had not known was coming. I thought about calling her. Not yet, but soon. I was watering the plants on the front porch when I heard footsteps on the path below. November in Santa Barbara is mild and golden, the kind of autumn that doesn't announce itself. The light just shifts slightly. The air cools by a few degrees, and the tourists thin out. And what's left is the place itself, unhurried and quiet, and exactly as wide as it always was. I had 3 potted plants on the porch now. A rosemary bush, a small lemon tree that had produced exactly 2 lemons so far, and something the nursery had called a coastal sage that smelled on warm mornings faintly like something I couldn't name, but recognized as good. I turned around. Claire stood at the bottom of the porch steps. She had not called ahead. She had not sent a message. She was simply there in a gray coat I had not seen before. Her hair pulled back without ceremony. No makeup that I could detect, her hands hanging at her sides with the particular stillness of someone who has rehearsed 100 different versions of this moment and arrived having abandoned all of them. She looked like her mother, not in any specific feature, in the quality of her stillness, in the way she was standing in the light. "Dad," she said. Just that. One word offered up like something fragile. I set down the watering can. "Come up," I said. She came up the steps slowly and sat in one of the 2 chairs on the porch, the one that faced the ocean. I went inside and put the kettle on. I stood in the kitchen while the water heated and listened to the sound of the waves and the sound of my daughter breathing on my porch, and tried to locate somewhere in my chest what I actually felt. What I found was not anger. The anger had spent itself a long time ago somewhere over the Arizona desert on a flight from New York to California. What was left was something older and more complicated: love, which had never gone anywhere, and grief which had arrived sometime around the night I sat in a dark apartment in Queens and listened to my phone ring, and something else underneath both of those that I did not yet have a name for. I brought out 2 cups of tea and set one in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it the way I wrap both hands around coffee when I need something solid to hold on to. Her knuckles were white. Her eyes were fixed on the ocean. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said. Her voice broke on the last word, split cleanly down the middle like wood along a grain. "I'm sorry for what I said at the club. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you. I'm sorry I believed—" She stopped, pressed her lips together hard. Her shoulders shook once, and then she pulled them back and kept going the way she had always kept going, the way I had taught her to keep going when she was small and the world was large and unkind. "I'm sorry it took me this long." I looked at my daughter, at the gray coat and the shaking hands and the eyes that were full and bright and trying very hard not to spill over. "I know you are," I said. "I believe you." She exhaled a long, unsteady breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. "But sorry," I said gently, "is where we start, not where we finish." She nodded. Her chin trembled once before she steadied it. "Then where do we go from here?" she asked. I looked out at the Pacific. The sun was getting low, laying a long path of light across the water that stretched all the way to the horizon, and probably further than that. "We go slowly," I said, "and we go honestly." I picked up my tea. "That's the only way I know how to build something that lasts." Claire looked at the ocean for a long moment. Then she lifted her cup and took a sip, and I lifted mine and took a sip, and we sat together on the porch in the November light while the Pacific did what it always did, and the coastal sage smelled like something good, and neither of us needed to say anything else right now. For the first time in months, I was not sitting alone. That was enough. For today, that was exactly enough. I built houses for 40 years. Load-bearing walls, solid foundations, structures meant to last. But the most important thing I ever built, and nearly lost, wasn't made of brick or concrete. It was trust. And trust, I've learned, cannot be inherited. It has to be earned every single day by the choices we make when no one is watching. If this story sounds familiar, if you've ever given everything to someone and watched them use it against you, I want to say this directly: don't do what I did. Don't wait 5 years to speak the truth. Don't carry silence like it's kindness, because it isn't. Speak sooner. Set boundaries earlier. The people who truly love you will stay. I'm not a perfect father. I made mistakes staying quiet when I should have spoken, giving more than was healthy, confusing generosity with love. But I believe, and I say this with God as my witness, that the truth always finds its way into the light. Always. It just needs someone willing to carry it there. These family stories, revenge, never start with hatred. They start with small silences and small surrenders. That's what makes family drama revenge so devastating. It grows from love gone wrong. If today's story moved you, if you recognized something of your own life in these family stories, revenge, leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join this family new stories every week. Thank you so much for staying until the end. A note going forward: some upcoming stories contain fictional elements created purely for reflection and education. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Step away, find what feeds your soul, and take good care of yourself.